Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Talking Reptiles. I'm Mark Perpetua of Reptile Encounters, and along with my good friends at Hudson Valley Reptile and Rescue, we want to talk to you today about the importance of lighting. Anybody who's got a pet bearded dragon or chameleon, iguana, you've probably heard about the importance of UVB. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about what UVB is important for, why our animals need it, and how we can probably utilize that on many other species, and I'll talk about why, as well as an array of different choices and what to look for in your UV bulb. So let's first talk about why our animals need it. UVB is an invisible part of the light spectrum that comes from natural sunlight. And what it does is it allows chemicals in our skin to undergo a reaction and create vitamin D. So that's not a very unheard of thing in humans. And of course, it's also going to be very important to our pet reptiles. Out in nature, they would be exposed to that natural UVB light and be able to generate vitamin D. Now, the big question is, why do some reptiles seem to need it more than others? And a lot of it has to do with their food choices. Snakes, as an example, are often said not to need UVB. And a large part of that is because we feed them whole organisms. And if they're eating a whole organism, such as a mouse or a rat, they're going to be getting vitamin D by consuming the entire animal. The big problem comes from when we start adding other animals, tegus, savanna monitors. We start feeding them pieces of animals, a lot of chopped meat, ground turkey, and we find that parts of an animal may not have enough vitamin D to fit their needs. So we might want to actually consider adding savanna monitors and tegus to the list of animals that utilize vitamin D in an important way out in nature. The biggest animals that are talked about in needing vitamin D, the biggest group that is, are vegetarians. Things like iguanas, tortoises, turtles, and of course our beloved bearded dragons. And the reason is plants do not generate vitamin D. So the precursor, the chemicals that we can eat in plants, need to be converted in the skin of an animal through the utilization of or exposure to UVB light. And if we can't get them natural sunlight, there are artificial options that are available in the pet trade. The advancement of our technology and knowledge of taking care of reptiles has really come a long way. So let's talk about some of the options first. Over here is a common aquarium. We're just using a small 10-gallon that was laying around as an example, because one of the options might be to just use an aquarium hood. A lot of UVB light come in the form of a fluorescent tube. So if we flip this up, there's our fluorescent tube. But first, I want to point out what this guy here is. We have to know the difference between full spectrum and UVB. The term full spectrum, basically think of your classic rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. A full spectrum is going to give an even amount of light through what is often called the visible spectrum, made up of those colors of the rainbow. And that is important to plants for photosynthesis. So this bulb right here says on it, it's Verilux brand, it says full spectrum here in the corner. And that would be important to an aquarium if you have live plants. You want your live plants to do well. They need to absorb a certain wavelength of light that's not ultraviolet in order to photosynthesize and stay alive. So first off, full spectrum is not UVB. That's important to note. The other reason I pulled this aquarium out is to talk about where we're going to place our UV bulbs. All right, so over here on my right, I have a few of the example bulbs that would actually put off UVB. In addition to UVB, they obviously do give some of that visible spectrum. It tells you that they're on, and it also then benefits the reptile's daytime active visible light needs. So we mentioned the classic fluorescent tube. This is a fluorescent tube that I took off of one of the iguana enclosures just so we had it for a demo. It's a little bit bigger than the aquarium hood we had, so it's not going to fit in that. But this is a ZoomEd brand 10.0. You're going to find that many of the brands are going to come with different numbers on them, and those numbers are going to relate to the amount of UV light, UVB specifically, that they're outputting. And we'll talk about percentage of that and who needs what in just a few seconds. But yeah, one of the things you'll notice, not only is it going to say it on the packaging, but right on the bulb itself, I can read ZoomEd 10.0 UVB. So remember to make sure, not full spectrum, but UVB. Another source of UVB is still from the fluorescent, but it's in what is called a compact coil. And these are still running under the same principles that a fluorescent tube works under, but they are in a compact coil, so they fit in a regular incandescent or screw-in light bulb type of socket. It's important to know that these benefit the animal for its UVB needs and also its daylight cycling needs, but they don't release any heat. So a good ceramic heat emitter under the heating pad, make sure connected to a thermostat, a whole other video, but make sure we hit the animal's temperature needs, remembering our reptiles are cold-blooded. And then we come up to another choice. This one's probably the most expensive because of their specialty output. None of these bulbs are typically cheap, but this is a mercury vapor bulb. And mercury vapor bulbs give you the benefit of not only giving UVB, but also producing some heat. So you get a little bit of both. However, remember the nighttime requirements of your animal. When you turn off the mercury vapor bulb, you're going to give it its nighttime cycle, remove the light stimulus, remove the UVB, but now we're also removing the heat, which is okay for some animals that have cool downs at nighttime, but be careful here where I live, where we are located in New York, if our nighttimes get too cold. And again, other heat sources, another video. So the last thing I want to mention is about the bulbs themselves. Regardless of the number, the problem is how much UVB our animals are actually receiving in the type of setup we have them in. And there's a number of things that could influence that. So out there today is a product called a UVB Meter. These are available online. You can Google search where to get them. Unfortunately, they're not very cheap. If you have one bearded dragon, chances are you're probably not going to invest in one. But with the number of reptiles we work with collectively here, it's not a bad idea to have this so you know exactly what's going on. And all you do is you point it at the UV light source and press the button, hold it, and it gives you a readout. So let's go over to our 10 first. Our 10, let's expect a number around 10. When I hold it to the bulb, I'm getting a readout of anywhere from 10 to 13 because I'm moving my hand. It's not perfectly steady. But I also want you to notice how close that is. What are the chances that your animal, sorry about that, what are the chances your animal is going to get that close to the bulb? So let's say we got a big cage. As I mentioned, this came off of an iguana. I have its basking area roughly a foot below this. So its maximum exposure is going to have that distance between the bulb and as far as the iguana can get. And down here, it's only reading at a 1.4. So that's a tremendous difference of how much UV is actually hitting the animal for it to benefit from. If I hold it even higher and we talk about the bottom of the cage off of its basking area, I'm getting a readout of less than 1. I'm still getting a readout that UV light is reaching down that far, but I'm getting a much lower readout. So regardless of whether this is a 10.0, a 15, or just a 5, is really going to be placement. The other thing Well, let's hold that for a second. Let's go over to the compact fluorescent. This one came from a package that didn't have a number on it. So it's a different brand than ZoomEd. It's a Thrive. I believe that is a PetSmart brand. And it says desert on it. So you would expect this to be a high output, an environment where an animal is going to be open basking. So let's try that one. I'm getting at the same range we started with the tube. It's putting out a 22 to 23. If you can see that, I'm not sure, or maybe you'll have to trust my readouts. But yeah, we're getting a much higher readout. And that has nothing to do with this being a compact fluorescent. It could be that this is a desert bulb. That's a tropical bulb, the 10.0. Tropical bulb might be utilized by an animal that has a lot of vegetation and may not be getting direct exposure. So that could be one of the reasons. Another thing to point out is these things lose their strength with age. They have a limited lifespan. They still give off the visible spectrum, but they lose that ability to generate and output the UVB that we're buying them for. But we'll test this one from a distance as well. You'll see that almost the same distance, I'm less than 1. I'm actually getting a lower reading with this bulb than I am the tube. So it may actually be the numbers on them and not age. This one came from a box. It's brand new. Haven't used it yet other than for the video purpose. This one over here, the tube that we started with, has been used for almost a year. Usually the recommendation in their limited lifespan is about 6 months. If my iguana is getting somewhere between 1 to 2 in that 6-inch to 1-foot range, then maybe that light still has a little bit more life to it. And if you want to get more money out of the bulbs, which aren't cheap, $25, $30 at a time, then maybe it's worth this investment so you're not replacing them too soon. But do keep in mind, they're not going to last forever. So we saved the Mercury Vapor for last. They tend to have a very strong output. And when I'm close to this, I'm getting the same readout as I did from the desert bulb. I'm getting 23s, 22s. It's bouncing around a little bit. There's a 24. But again, as we start to go away from the bulb, we are diminishing the amount of UV. And again, I don't know. I'm assuming I'm very close to the same range. I'm again at a 0.7. I'm less than 1. The Mercury Vapor seemed to have the highest readout at the greatest distance, followed by the 10.0 tube, and then our fluorescent compact came in last. So placement, distance is really important. And that's going to be based on how much UV does my animal actually need. Just because it says tropical for an iguana, desert for a bearded dragon, we don't necessarily need them to get 15s out of the reading. The UV index that we're reading on here, 15 is actually pretty high and might even be dangerous. So you don't want this bulb being right on top of your animal. So the other thing to point out, if you haven't heard about it yet, it's kind of new to an old timer like me, is something called the Ferguson Zone. A lot of research was done to develop this, and it's how much UV light, according to the UV index, which is the number we're reading here, how much exposure animals of different environments typically get. So if you look in the description below, we're going to include a link for where you can get more information on the Ferguson Zone. While I got this meter here, there's one other variable I do want to talk about. I've also been asked quite often, UV bulbs are expensive. Is it possible that I can just put my turtle tank or my bearded dragon in the picture window in the summertime? And to protect us, most glass produced has a filtering property to it. Natural gas glass typically does, and most window pane glass is built in with even more protection because we know there's a danger of too much UVB for us. Skin burns, skin cancer. So windows typically block it out. So if we go back to this original aquarium, the hood comes with glass. So you may think that, this is a perfect setup. I'll just put the UV tube in the fixture. And well, since I don't have one that fits the actual size of this one, I'm going to put this right here. And you may remember we were reading anywhere from 6 to 7 when I had this up close. And now I'm putting a pane of glass between it, and I am reading zeros and 0.1. So we are practically touching the glass and getting little, I mean tiny to zero amounts of UVB. So imagine what's going to happen when we do the separation. I mean, I'll do it for fun, but if it's 0 at the top, it's going to get filtered even more. And I got absolutely 0 at just around a foot to 13 inches away. So yeah, we don't want glass, and not just even with the tube. We can do that same thing if I just turn this aquarium on the side and find out with our newest bulb that put out a lot. Remember, this one was reading in the 20s when we were up close. And here I go again, 0 to 0.1 in just about an inch of distance. So we don't want glass. Not only natural sunlight through our windows is not going to work, but natural sunlight through a window and then through an aquarium is not going to work. And then natural or a UV bulb with a glass top. So really, what you need is, if it's not open air for something like a turtle or a tortoise, you need a good old screen lid or some way of fixing a UV bulb in the inside safely so that your animal's not climbing on it and risking injury or shock, but also going to allow those UV rays to penetrate through. And with a screen lid, there's absolutely no filtration. And I'm right back up at my high numbers. And I can't see it from this angle, but I'm sure we're getting plenty. Let's see. Yeah, I'm right back up to the 14s, 15s, and right at the high zone again. So that's just a little bit about considering not only what size UV bulb you need, but placement in the aquarium or terrarium, distance from the animal, and what type of obstruction, so we don't filter out the benefit of the UVB if we're going to take the time to spend the money, and of course give our animal the best care. And the whole reason for this is what vitamin D does. Vitamin D is really important for the absorption of calcium. And if the animals don't absorb calcium, they're not going to be able to build strong bones. So the biggest thing we see in reptiles are deformed skeletal structures, especially long bones like arms and legs, and deformed shells in turtles, either caving in the back, curling up on the sides, also limbs that are developing poorly, not walking properly. And this is all lumped under the term metabolic bone disease, or MBD. Metabolic means they can't metabolize the calcium because they're not getting enough vitamin D. In addition to that, we'll have to do another video on calcium itself. The vitamin D is not really going to work very well if the animal's not getting calcium. But at least that can be provided through a dietary supplement. Vitamin D is really hard to do that, especially with the natural foods that the animals eat, and the vitamin D that is produced by having exposure to UVB light is a much more natural way for them to get it. So if you have any questions, please make sure you send them to us. Let us know if this video helped you and what we could add in the future if we need to tackle this topic again. It is a big one. It can be fairly complicated. We wanted to give you enough information, but keep it simple so you can just go out and set up the best environment and make sure your animal is living happy and healthy so that both you and him can enjoy their time together. Thank you very much, and keep tuned. We'll be back with more Talking Reptiles.